You've probably heard that queens were pampered with baths and expensive perfumes, but Queen Mary II's hygiene routine, not quite what you'd expect from a royal in the 17th century. Instead of soap, water, or fresh towels, Mary avoided these modern luxuries and opted for something far more unusual. At the time, soap was a rare and precious commodity. Water wasn't seen as the best way to cleanse, and, believe it or not, Mary wasn't alone in this practice. She would use a blend of oils and powders applied to her skin in place of soap. The goal wasn't to clean the skin. It was more about covering up what was there. These oils, often mixed with herbs, were meant to mask odors and create a smooth, polished appearance. But the problem, while Mary's skin may have appeared perfect for a short time, these concoctions weren't real. Cleansers. Imagine layering thick oils on your skin all day without washing them off. Over time, the buildup trapped dirt, dust, and dead skin cells, leaving behind a layer that, while fragrant, wasn't exactly hygienic. Her routine reflected the standards of the time. In an era when bathing was considered dangerous, water was feared for its potential to make people ill. Avoiding water became a form of control. Mary, too, didn't just want to care for her skin. She wanted to project an image of perfection. While other royals embraced similar methods, when you're queen, you're under a microscope. Your image has to remain flawless even if the methods behind it were far from clean. In the end, her soapless routine made her appear immaculate to court, but at what cost? Queen Mary II's hair was a crown in itself, one that didn't see the touch of water. While you may think of a queen with shiny, clean hair, Mary's tresses were far from the clean, well-maintained look we'd expect today. In fact, her approach to hair care was, by modern standards, nothing short of gross. Instead of washing her hair with water, Mary relied on powders and oils to keep her locks looking regal. These concoctions weren't meant to cleanse, but to cover up the lack of cleanliness. Her hair, often styled in elaborate updos and crowned with extravagant wigs, became a symbol of her royal status. But the reality behind those wigs was less glamorous. The constant use of oils and powders led to greasy, matted hair, and over time it became difficult to even comb through her natural strands beneath the wigs. Perhaps the most shocking part, Mary's court and attendants were well aware of her hair care practices, but they turned a blind eye. After all, royalty was about image, and her royal appearance was more important than actual cleanliness. The powder-coated hair wasn't just about vanity, it was about power. A perfect, pristine crown of hair conveyed that the queen was beyond the reach of normal human care. But in reality, her hair was anything but clean. The use of these powders also meant that her hair became stiff, sticky, and hard to manage. The oils trapped grime, creating a perfect environment for dust and dirt to accumulate. As her natural hair thinned, Mary relied even more heavily on wigs, which were often heavily scented to mask any undesirable odors. To those who served her, these heavy wigs weren't just a beauty accessory. They were an undeniable, unspoken signal of her detachment from the mundane realities of hygiene. In the end, Queen Mary's unwashable hair was just another piece of the puzzle in her quest for an impeccable, untouchable royal image. Queen Mary II lived in a world of elaborate fragrances, where scent became more important than cleanliness. Her fascination with fragrances wasn't just a matter of personal preference, it was about maintaining an image, one of divine purity and royal grace. The reality, these scents were often used to cover up the unpleasant odors of the royal court and the inevitable neglect of personal hygiene. Instead of bathing regularly or washing her clothes, Queen Mary relied heavily on fragrant oils, rose waters, and herbal concoctions. These were applied liberally to her body, clothes, and even her personal items. At first glance, one might think that her royal appearance was truly immaculate, but the truth was far from glamorous. The oils she wore were meant to mask the natural scent of her body and cover up the fact that hygiene had fallen to the wayside in favor of royal appearances. Mary, too, wasn't the only one in her court who depended on these fragrant illusions. In fact, the entire royal household relied on perfumes, oils, and scented powders to avoid confronting the reality of their personal hygiene. It became a sort of social necessity to hide the truth beneath a cloud of fragrance, masking the stench of neglect with the sweet smells of luxury. But here's the catch. These oils and perfumes weren't exactly beneficial to the body. Many of these mixtures were made from toxic substances, including mercury, lead, and other harsh chemicals. While they created a divine fragrance on the surface, they were slowly taking a toll on the Queen's skin. The same ingredients that made her smell like heaven were secretly causing damage beneath her regal appearance. The repeated use of these perfumes led to more than just a superficial scent. Her skin, constantly exposed to these substances, began to show the signs of wear and tear. It wasn't long before Mary's once radiant complexion became plagued with rashes, irritation, and the consequences of years of toxic exposure. But the royal image had to be preserved, so the Queen continued to embrace her fragrant armor. In the end, Queen Mary's obsession with fragrance wasn't just about smelling good, it was about projecting an image of perfection, one that concealed the dirty truth of life at court. When we think of royal palaces, we imagine golden halls, ornate furniture, and grand feasts. What we don't often think about is the royal toilet situation, and Queen Mary II's court was no exception. Despite the royal grandeur, there was no plumbing. In fact, the palaces she resided in were more medieval than modern, with toilets being a far cry from the lavish surroundings they occupied. For Queen Mary II, the process of relieving herself was far from dignified. The Queen used a close stool, an ornate cushioned chair with a hole in the seat, under which a ceramic chamber pot was placed. But here's where things get even worse. This chamber pot wasn't discreetly hidden away. It had to be cleaned and perfumed multiple times a day. And this responsibility fell not to the lowly servants, but to one of the most trusted and prestigious officials at court, the groom of the stool. This position may sound strange, but it was crucial in the royal hierarchy. The groom of the stool had unparalleled access to the Queen, assisting with everything from dressing to, well, bathroom duties. Despite its somewhat gross-sounding nature, the position was a high honor, providing not only closeness to the Queen, but also significant political influence. But outside the Queen's private space, the situation was even worse. The entire palace relied on chamber pots and cesspits, with servants known as gong farmers tasked with carrying the waste out under the cover of darkness. These cesspits, often located near the palace or even directly below certain rooms, were foul-smelling, disease-ridden, and overflowing, creating an unbearable stench in an attempt to mask the smell. Herbs like lavender, rosemary, and sweet marjoram were scattered across the floors, and rushes were spread to cover the dirty floors. But these rushes weren't changed often. Beneath them, dirt, food scraps, and human waste accumulated, creating a disgusting reality hidden beneath the royal facade. Queen Mary II's beauty was often admired, but beneath her pale, flawless face lay a dark secret. Her makeup routine wasn't just about beauty, it was about control, and unfortunately, it came at a high price. At the time, pale skin was a symbol of nobility and purity, and Mary's obsession with achieving the perfect porcelain complexion went beyond vanity. It was about maintaining an image of otherworldly grace and dignity. To achieve this flawless appearance, Queen Mary would apply layers of white lead-based makeup, a mixture known as Venetian cirrus. This toxic compound was meant to give her the pale, ethereal look that was all the rage among royals, but it was far from safe. The lead in the makeup would seep into her skin, causing rashes, irritation, and even permanent damage. But that wasn't all. Over time, the lead caused the skin to crack and peel, leaving the queen with a damaged, fragile complexion beneath the layers of paint. Yet, Mary didn't stop there. Her obsession with perfection extended to her lips and cheeks, which she would color with vermilion, another dangerous substance containing mercury. Just like her facial makeup, the mercury would gradually seep into her bloodstream, affecting her health in profound ways. Her lips, once a vibrant shade of red, would likely have caused severe neurological damage over time. But for Mary, the image was everything. She could never risk appearing imperfect in the eyes of her subjects, so she doubled down on her beauty rituals. To hide the toll the makeup was taking on her skin, Mary relied on more makeup, creating an endless cycle of coverage. The more she used, the more fragile her skin became. Eventually, Mary's face became so dependent on these layers of makeup that it became less of a beauty ritual and more of a necessity to maintain her identity. Historians have debated whether Mary truly understood the danger of her makeup. It's likely that she didn't realize the full extent of the damage caused by her obsession. But what is certain is that her appearance was an essential part of her reign. As her skin grew more damaged, she became more protective of her image, requiring artists to follow strict guidelines when painting her portraits. She couldn't afford to let her true self slip through the cracks. When we picture the grandeur of royal palaces, we often imagine the finest silks, sparkling jewels, and lavish feasts. What we rarely consider are the unsanitary realities behind the scenes, and Queen Mary II's court was no exception. Despite the royal opulence, there was no plumbing. Palaces like those of Queen Mary were more medieval than modern, and their toilet systems were just as primitive. For the Queen, this meant that when she needed to relieve herself, it wasn't a simple trip to the bathroom. Queen Mary used a close stool, a cushioned chair with a hole in it, under which a chamber pot was placed. This may sound familiar, but here's the unpleasant part. This chamber pot had to be cleaned and perfumed multiple times a day, and this task didn't fall to just any servant. It was entrusted to one of the most trusted officials at court, the groom of the stool. The groom of the stool was a position of great honor, granting unparalleled access to the Queen. In fact, this royal servant had the unique responsibility of assisting the Queen with personal hygiene and dressing. While the role was prestigious, it was far from glamorous, being directly involved in the Queen's bathroom duties. Beyond the Queen's personal chamber, the entire palace operated without modern plumbing. Chamber pots and cesspits were the norm, and these cesspits were often located near or directly beneath rooms in the palace. They were foul-smelling, overflowing, and prone to disease, creating a toxic and disgusting environment. The waste would be carted away under the cover of night by servants known as gong farmers, who would transport it out of the palace to mask the smell. The palace was littered with herbs like rosemary and lavender, and rushes were spread across floors to cover the filth. But these rushes weren't changed often, and under them, dirt, hair, and food scraps accumulated, creating an unbearable stench that was a permanent part of royal life. Queen Mary II's hygiene habits weren't just about cleanliness. They were about control and perception. In her time, appearances were everything, and Mary knew this better than anyone. She spent her reign carefully constructing an image of royalty, purity, and divine grace, all while neglecting the simple hygiene practices that we take for granted. Today, everything about her, from her pale complexion to her scented, oil-laden hair, was designed to keep up the illusion of untouchable perfection. She avoided water as a means of maintaining her image, believing that bathing, with its exposure of her body, would somehow tarnish the divine image she projected. Instead, she relied on perfumes, powders, and oils to create a sense of cleanliness and grandeur. But these measures were more about maintaining an image than actual hygiene. While we now see personal cleanliness as vital to health, for Mary, it was all about crafting a royal appearance that couldn't be tainted by the messiness of reality. The Queen's body, much like the crown she wore, had to remain pristine, untarnished by the natural processes of decay or imperfection. In the end, Queen Mary's approach to hygiene reveals just how far royalty would go to maintain their image. How, in her case, it was all about the illusion of perfection.